is Iman Bashir, and I'm a climate lawyer and environmental scientist based here in Nairobi. And I'll be the moderator and sort of your guide through this conversation that we are all here to learn and understand. I'd like to get started by welcoming all of you. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're joining from. Thank you for taking the time to come and learn with us, discuss with us, and converse with us around this quest for understanding Kenya's renewable energy space and Kenya's renewable energy future and the impact that the various legislations have on either promoting it or bringing challenges that we may have to deal with. So just as a background on why we're here to discuss the impact of the feed-in tariff policy in renewable energy in Kenya and the impact that it has on the adoption and implementation of renewable energy projects in Kenya and what the future holds with regards to the development of these projects. We have a great presentation lined up for us to be able to understand the very basics of FIT policy as well as the renewable energy landscape in Kenya. We all know that Kenya values its renewable energy sources very much. Over 85% of Kenya's energy space is sourced from renewable energy sources, and the renewable energy sources have been continuously legislated in Kenya. We all started the discussion around renewable energy in Kenya in 2004 with the sessional paper number 4 of 2004 that discusses how to incorporate various other sources of renewable energy in Kenya's energy matrix, such as solar, wind, and geothermal sources. Then the conversation of legislation moved from 2004 to 2008, where the initial renewable energy feed-in tariff policy was sort of introduced. And with this, we saw how the government of Kenya looked to encourage private companies, small and medium private companies, to not only invest in electricity generation, but develop this space even further. Then that leads us to the Energy Act that we all know, and further changes to the feed-in tariff that will be outlined today with our presentation. And with that, just sort of very basic introduction, I'd like to invite our first speaker today, who is going to give us the initial welcoming remarks, as well as set us off for our conversations today. So Pasi Amayo Ogola is an energy enthusiast, and she is currently a Chevening Scholar in energy and development issues at University of Sussex. She also served as the program manager of Sustainable Energy Futures in East Africa at Society for International Development, and she's an ardent believer of Africa and Kenya particularly being able to harness its renewable energy and energy resources to develop itself economically and sustainably. So Pasi, welcome. Yes, there you are. Go ahead, Pasi.
Great. Thank you so much, Iman. Like, I'm super
Pasi, you're unmuted, unfortunately.
Can you hear me now?
Not yet.
What about now?
Myself.
Try again. Can you hear me?
Can I just see in the chat if you can hear Pasi? Maybe it's a problem on my end. Sorry.
Because I guess perfect.
Go ahead, Pasi. I'll sort out my issues.
I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having me. Before I can introduce the Sustainable Energy Futures program, I'd like to invite Arthur Mulero to just kind of give us a welcoming remark, and then I will introduce the project soon after that. So Arthur, if you're with us, please, I'm going to give you the floor to give some welcoming remarks. There seems to be an audio challenge.
Hello. I can hear you now, Pasi.
Yes, there you go. Sorry, after you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much, man. Yeah. And welcome to this on the renewable, the REFiT policy. I'm not going to say very much like to that has been done by my colleagues in bringing, because I think it's opportunity for us to begin to rethink of how we can begin to use renewable energy catalyst for
So good afternoon again. I think the connection seems to be pretty bad. This is the COVID-19 age has made us to be virtual human beings, but I'm sure we will navigate through this hurdle and challenge. With the bad connection from Arthur, who was giving us the opening remarks, I'll go ahead and introduce the program this afternoon, and then we can jump into the presentation for the day and then the dialogue with the Martha Wakoli and Iman Bashir. This project, it's called the Sustainable Energy Futures Program, and it was started in the year 2016. And when it started, the idea was to look at the state of renewable energy and other forms of energy in the East African region, and using the available data and information and research that had been done to begin to think about what are the possible futures running up to the year 2050. And out of this program, we had developed three scenarios for Eastern Africa, which are available in the publication Energy for Whom, Scenarios for Eastern Africa, which will be shared in the chat box so you can look at that publication. We began to have very national focused conversations in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Ethiopia. But for a very long time, we've been researching deeply into the energy issues and dilemmas in Kenya's energy system. And so we started together with our partners, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, a series of conversation and research that gave birth to a second publication that was launched last year called Energy for What? Energy Issues and Dilemmas in Kenya, which is another publication that you want to pick. A lot of the policies that exist around energy are not policies that the public have interacted with, neither do they understand them and know how to use them and adopt them in their daily use and interaction with energy. And so we thought it a good exercise and activity to have public energy forums to unpack and demystify some of these policies. In a previous meeting, we had a session where we unpacked the Kenya Energy Act 2019 with Halima Hussein. And today we're going to be unpacking another policy, which is the Kenya Renewable Energy Feed-in Tariff policy, and the history of it and the developments that have taken place in the development of this policy and its use for the renewable energy sector. And so with that, I want to welcome you to the conversation today. I want to urge you to use the chat function to interact, ask questions, put in comments. And I am personally, and together with the SID team and our partners, the Heinrich Böll Foundation, looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have this afternoon. So without any further ado, I want to welcome you all to this conversation, and I look forward to the outcome and interaction that we'll have. So I'm going to hand over back to you, Iman, to take us into the conversations for the afternoon. And my name is Pasi Amayo. Thanks.
Thank you, Pasi, for the wonderful words of welcome and setting the tone for these conversations. I'm sure we're all feeling the energy, the excitement, the thrill to learn. So to guide the conversation today will be Geoffrey Ndegwa. He's the Energy and Food Security Advisor at WFP, and he has tremendous experience in climate change, renewable energy, as well as livelihood assessment issues in Africa. He's here today to lend his expertise on the renewable energy feed-in tariff policy, and he'll lay down the groundwork for the conversation today. I'm sure a lot of us are here to learn what the FIT policy itself is, how it came to be, what it means for the renewable energy space in Kenya, and what some of the challenges are and recommendations. So this expert presentation will be by Geoffrey. I don't know if you are with us, Geoffrey. Can you hear me? Perfect. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. So I'll lend you the platform to guide us through the impact of the Kenya REFiT policy and what it means for the energy space. So go ahead, Geoffrey. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Iman. I hope the panel can hear me clearly. As Iman has introduced me, my name is Geoffrey Ndegwa. I'm an energy consultant. I've been consulting for different organizations in the energy field, both in Kenya and in the Africa region. Today, I'm going to make a background presentation on the impact of the REFiT policy in Kenya. And I will start by giving a short background of the feed-in tariff in the country. Then I'm gonna explain a little bit about the features of the feed-in tariff policy, and I'll base it on the policy that was developed in 2008 and finally revised in 2012. Then I will explain the impact of the feed-in tariff implementation in the country, and finally I'll have a bit of conclusion and recommendations to move us forward. About the history of the feed-in tariff, the first document was ratified in 2008 with the major aim of encouraging investment in renewable energy through providing investment security to power generators or investors, reducing administrative and transaction costs of investment in renewable energy, and also encouraging the private sector in the establishment of independent power production facilities. The initial feed-in tariff policy did not, however, achieve the desired impact because it had high tariff ceilings that most of the investors saw that it was not worth the investment, and therefore they shied away. Due to this, the policy was revised in 2010 and also in 2012 to accommodate more diverse energy sources, because the initial one was mostly targeting solar and wind, and with the revisions, they also included biomass and geothermal energy into the feed-in tariff policy. The policy was finally codified into a statute through addition into the Energy Act that was ratified in the year of 2019. On the key features of the Kenya feed-in tariff policy, we find that there have been some discussions on the use of the feed-in tariff as a policy for encouraging investment in renewable energy, with some people for and others against. But basically, the Kenyan one was tailor-made in such a way that it was more attractive to foreign investors or to private investment into the energy sector. And to do this, there are the three key observable instruments that were used. The first one is the investment period, which was spread over 20 years. This was for the purpose of lowering the investment risk, because the investors could be able to have long-term planning on the investment, and also to be able to accurately forecast on the profit margins of their investment. The second one is that the tariffs were denominated in US dollars with the aim of eliminating the risk that comes with local currency fluctuations, so as to be able to attract foreign investment into the country. And the final one is that the investors were guaranteed priority purchase of the power once the power was generated, so that so that they would not have the dilemma of generating the power and then it will not be absorbed into the grid. I know there have been a lot of discussions about this because there have been some investments that the country has had to pay for power, even though the power was not delivered, because the contractual agreement stated that once the investor generated power, then the country was obliged to either absorb it or pay for it, even if it's not being delivered into the grid. The feed-in policy particularly recognized with the revisions, the feed-in policy recognized that electricity generation is dependent on the technology itself and the site where the investment is being made and the context within which the investment is being made. And based on this, the tariffs were set about based on the technology from which the investor is investing in, if it is wind, if it is solar, if it is biomass. Then the scale of investments, you have the small renewable energy projects. Mostly they were categorized to be those up to 10 megawatts capacity. And then you have the medium one that could go up to 100 megawatt. And for wind, actually, it could go up to 500 megawatts. So that being the background of the policy that was revised in 2012, there have been new developments currently, as many of you know that now we have the renewable energy auctions policy that was drafted in 2021, but it's waiting the final ratification. And we also have the revised feed-in policy tariff of 2021 that has also been drafted, waiting final ratification. And in the new proposed feed-in tariff policy, only small-scale biomass and biogas and small hydro projects of up to 20 megawatts will be considered. And all solar and wind power projects are supposed to move to under the auctions policy rather than the feed-in tariff policy, while geothermal projects will be governed under a different policy that is yet to be actually drafted, called the policy on licensing of geothermal greenfields. These new developments are supposed to change the entire landscape of investment in renewable energy once all the ratifications have been made, and I think it will form a basis for our discussions actually moving forward today. Under the feed-in tariff policy 2012, which is the main focus for our discussion today, the cumulative output from all the projects was actually capped at 1,551 megawatts, so as to be able to ensure that they don't go beyond 10% of the national capacity, installed capacity in the country. The small renewable energy projects of up to 10 megawatts was capped at 51 megawatts. And and those ones that are up to 10 megawatts, above 10 megawatts, were capped at 1,500 megawatts. The feed-in tariff project status by December showed that all the projects that were in development cycle, those were completed with signed PPAs, with initialized PPAs, had a total capacity of 4,938 megawatts, whereas the total target for the feed-in tariff projects was actually capped at 1,551 megawatts. So basically, what this shows is that the cap actually did not work because there is a mismatch between the projects on the pipeline And if all these projects would go to full implementation, it means that Kenya would have massive overinvestment in energy generation, which of course would make power very expensive, bearing in mind most of these investment at our feed-in tariffs are protected under the priority access to the grid, and the country has to pay for them. However, bearing in mind that we did this study in 2010, in 2020, and the first feed-in tariff policy was drafted in 2008, we can see that it's not very right to say that this policy has been instrumental in driving investment in renewable energy in Kenya, because up to date, in the period of 12 years, only 7 projects were in operation as at the time of this writing this document, and with only a capacity of 10.3 megawatts. So ideally, I think that demonstrates a little bit of a failure. Even though when you look at the pipeline, then you see there is a lot of projects that are supposed to be coming on board in due course. Looking at the impact of the feed-in tariff on the cost of electricity, because I think everybody has been talking about I think there was a big debate about this, about the cost the power purchase agreements and the feed-in tariffs are having on the consumer. And actually, within the Kenyan regulatory framework, EPRA is mandated to set the electricity tariffs in the country, and all the consumers are subjected to the same tariff, regardless of where you are getting your power from. The tariff is normally based on the non-fuel levies that are used to generate the electricity, the VAT, other levies, and pass-through costs. It is the pass-through costs that normally accommodate the power procurement under the feed-in tariffs, because the power purchased at the feed-in tariffs is normally accounted for under the pass-through costs. And the REFiT policy allows the power off-taker, in this case it is the Kenya Power, to recover between 70 and 85% of the cost of power generated and supplied through the feed-in tariff policy, which of course now impacts directly on the cost of power. The notable thing is that if the pass-through costs that the Kenya Power or the power off-taker if the pass-through costs that the power off-taker how do I frame that? If the pass-through costs are more than what is allowed by EPRA, then it means that the supplier is not allowed to charge this on the consumers, and is supposed to absorb that directly as its own operating losses. The downside of this is that the power off-taker is not able to generate enough revenue for investment into its own infrastructure, and with time it might be that this might lead to deterioration of the infrastructure. When looking at the Kenya Power EDIA reports of the 2020, it showed that much of the income or of the profits that Kenya Power had generated by procuring power from the other power suppliers, much of it was paid up to companies that supplied power as independent power producers through PPAs, and it was left without any income in the end. So actually, you can see that the feed-in tariff policy itself, if it is not well managed, and if the onboarding of the project is not well controlled, then it has the possibility of leading to skyrocketing of the power to the consumers, and also impacting negatively on the resources and the investment of the power of taker in the country. Other issues related to investment under the feed-in tariff that were highlighted include the contestation of the land acquisition process between landowners, developers, and even local governments. There are documented cases between different potential investors taking each other to court, or even landowners taking investors to court, or even local governments taking potential investors to court, because it's not very clear who the land rights, where the investment will be made, the land belongs to. So these are some of the issues that have been observed over time during the investments on renewable energy projects, and also this applies to the feed-in tariff investments. Then you have the disenfranchisement of some members of society, especially women, and even the nomadic communities, because they don't have the legal land tenure documents. They don't have title deeds. In some cultures, women are not allowed to own land, and therefore it ends up the land ends up being claimed by men, and they get all the compensation from the companies, and women, or in some cases children, end up not benefiting at all from this kind of investment. We have had cases reported of misuse of land compensation by some household members, especially men. I think it was a common issue reported in the Rift Valley. I think in the area where Kipeto was investing, some men would get the compensation. They would disappear for about 2 months, and they would come back without any money, and they had already gotten compensation for the land. Then you have other issues that have been raised. Some include the health impact of the technologies. Some involve loss of livelihoods due to the space being taken over by the investments. Others are environmental impacts that this kind of technologies have in the areas where the investments are done, especially on the wildlife, bearing in mind that some of these investments, especially on wind, they are targeted in spatial in areas that have very low populations, but they have high concentration of wildlife, biodiversity, and therefore this can easily be impacted. Another issue is access to the jobs. Yeah, it is always the report that this number of jobs are created, but how are they being accessed by the local people, by disadvantaged members of society? This has always been an issue, and we've had some communities demonstrating and being against investment in renewable energy projects in their areas. Benefits that have been registered so far through investment in the renewable energy. You have rural development, mostly stimulated by the access to power, and also access to livelihood activities. So, for example, it was found that in Tarek, in Narok, a total of 120 local jobs were created by just setting up a solar mini grid, but also new shops, welding shops, woodwork shops, shops were able to operate at night, and therefore the economy of the entire rural area was transformed just by having power in the area. Then you have other investments like Kipeto that was able to take land under the lease model, where households are normally paid every year. Every year. And this also creates a revenue stream for the family. They are able to cater for their daily needs. And above that, they also invest. They also committed to invest 5% of the profits in community projects to also improve the quality of life in the rural areas. Then on the front of the job creation, so you have statistics that show that every 1 megawatt of solar mini grid capacity installed leads to over 800 full-time jobs in the area. And for example, in Turkana, the Turkana Wind Park had 2,500 workers, with most of them non-skilled position being taken over by the local community themselves. In another case of a project that is proposed to be developed, compared to solar power project, to require 200 skilled and unskilled workers over a period of 12 months, but also over the 20-year also lifetime of the project, it will be employing about directly 20 people to operate and maintain the systems. So you see that these are general benefits that trickle down to the local communities within where the investments are made. Moving forward, we can say that the feed-in tariff itself has, of course, attracted a lot of potential investors in the country, but yeah, we still can't see a lot of operating projects, and it's hoped that maybe we will, the platform that has been laid, looking at the number of projects that are on the pipeline, we can't say it's a complete failure, but we can say that it has taken time, maybe for the investors to catch up and to be able to have projects certified, and also to invest and have the project operating. Based on this understanding, we made some few recommendations, and one is to the government, that the government should design incentive structures at national and subnational level, bearing in mind that now we have 2 levels of government, at both the county and the national government. And most of the investments may be controlled by the national government, but they are invested in the jurisdiction of the county governments. So both of them should foster a conducive environment where the investment can take place, unlike in some situations where we see a conflict between project developers and county government, even though the national government has already ratified the implementation of the projects. Development partners can also give a helping hand by giving assistance and capacity building on necessary skills that are needed, not only in the investment itself, but also in the negotiations of the contracts, in preparation of the contracts, in conducting feasibility studies, because these are some of the areas where it was observed that lead to taking a lot of time before the projects are able to be, the investments are able to kick off. Private sector are also encouraged to expand on investment models that focus on sustainable development outcomes, and also knowing that the trajectory shows that more power will be generated from this kind of investments, but the capacity for absorbing this power is also limited in the country. And therefore, more innovative investment and financing models should be looked at that can also stimulate Kenyans at large to be able to take in more power, because as you go to the rural areas, especially under the rural electrification model, you will find so many houses that have been connected to electricity, but they are only using the electricity to light two or three bulbs, and maybe a radio and charging a phone. And with this kind of huge investments into power, if you want to pay back on the investment, you need to stimulate more power consumption. And I do think in the urban areas, you already have a lot of people consuming power with activities beyond lighting. But in the rural areas, most of the people are only using the power for lighting, whereas there are so many other productive uses that the power can be put into. Then we should aim to address cultural barriers that prevent women and other vulnerable demographics from benefiting from large-scale development. And this transits from having a say in the compensation discussions with the investors, to access to the resources and access to the jobs that are generated by this kind of investments. So we should look for ways of being able to address this kind of barriers. Finally, we recognize that the CSOs and NGOs in the country have been playing a key role in ensuring that most of the investments that are made in the power sector are not only sustainable, but they are also delivering quality, and they are leading to the improvement on the quality of life on the people where the investments are made. A case in point is the investment that was supposed to be done in Lamu that was to be based on coal, that had a lot of interest from NGOs and CSOs, and finally, when they combined with the community, they were able to sort of put off this kind of investment that is not only harmful to the environment, but also to the health of the people who would be exposed to the emissions that would be coming from this kind of the fumes that are emitted by burning coals to generate electricity. And I think with that, I come to the end of my presentation. I thank the SID team for giving me the opportunity to participate in this activity and also to make this presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. That was indeed a very informative presentation, particularly the outlining of what this FIT policy would mean for the common Wananchi paying their electricity bill, and what the impact is on the marginalized communities and the marginalized sections of the community. Before we go into questions that I'm sure the audience has for Geoffrey, I'd like to mention that while the FIT policy was codified into law in 2019 with its inclusion into the Energy Act, the changes that Geoffrey mentioned from the 2021 FIT policy has not yet been gazetted into an act of parliament, and the status that it enjoys legally as at now does not give it the same security and protection that an act of parliament enjoys. So a policy would rely more on political support and can easily be changed or even done away with if it's not codified into an act of parliament. So we need to take that into account with the 2021 changes. With that, I'd like to field off any questions that the audience may have for Geoffrey. Just put up your hand or leave it in the chat, and I'll make sure that Geoffrey will get to the questions. In the meantime, while we wait for the questions, Geoffrey, you mentioned, I see a question from Jesse Nyokabi. Before I ask this question, you mentioned that the community is protected when it comes to agreements with the energy producers and the private companies that are coming to get into agreements with the government. Is the women and the young people, are their voices taken into account when it comes to the decision making, or are the challenges as of now the same as you mentioned in your presentation?
Thank you, Iman. Yeah, the law in the country actually protects the rights of women and actually the entire family when it comes to investments in the any investments that are related to land. The land laws actually protect the entire family unit ownership of the land. The main challenge has always been actually on the implementation of the laws. So you find that in some cases, people might tend to bypass the laws and people might tend to circumvent the laws. But the law is very clear that all the decisions that are made, especially the, pertaining investments in land or disposal of land, the voice of active participation of women and the entire family is needed. So I can say that with the communities being more and more informed about their rights, especially the women in the rural areas, a role that is being played currently by the CSOs to try to educate the people. And also the investment, the investors acknowledging the fact that for them to avoid challenges in the coming days, they need to bring on board all these segments of the society. We have seen the tendency now shifting towards inclusivity of everybody in the current negotiations or in current compensations that have been taking place. So I can say we started on the wrong footing, where the views or the participation of the marginalized demographics were never taken into consideration, to a point where now we can say we've not reached the destination, but there is a substantial level of engagement of this kind of demographics in decision making, but also in terms of getting the benefits from any negotiations or discussions.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm glad the direction and the trajectory is headed in a positive angle. With that, I'll now invite the hands that are up in the questions in the chat box. You can just put up your hand and I'll let you directly ask your question to Geoffrey. I'll start with Jesse. Jesse, if you can unmute and just ask Geoffrey directly, that would be great. Just put up your hand and you can ask directly.
Okay, can I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead, Jesse. Thank you.
Yes, Geoffrey, I just wanted to ask, Kenya has been attracting international investment, that is investors who want to come invest in Kenya due to FIT policy. Now, the country has been talking that now we need to take the direction and we need to hit the road and roll out the energy auction. So my question was, what is the future of FIT in Kenya?
Thank you, Jesse, for the question. Actually, we are all waiting in anticipation to see what the future of FIT is. And as I made in my presentation, actually, the government, and actually it's clear from the statistics that I presented, the FIT has been attracting a lot of investment in the country. The challenge here is, are we getting the value for money on all these investments? Because at the end of the day, we are getting, we'll be having so much power being generated more than we can be able to take in. And therefore, I think it's a clever way of the government trying to also to limit the amount of investment that are taking place, because everybody accepts that we now need to sort of start stimulating energy or power, electricity consumption to improve the living standards of the rural people, where we have a lot of potential for bringing in development. And as we know, energy is an enabler for rural development. Until we do that, if we only target the urban areas to take all this power, and most of the target areas, I don't say they are saturated, but yes, a lot of urban areas are already absorbing a lot of power, then we might have a scenario where we'll be the investors will be generating a lot of energy that we are obliged to buy, but we don't have anybody to consume the power. And therefore, with auctions, it seems that the government now has found a way to sort of try to align the power demand with the power supply, such that they will only be auctioning the capacity that the country is able to absorb directly, so that then the stimulation of power consumption will be moving hand in hand with the investment in power, and therefore they will only be targeting very small investments under the REFiT policy. I hope I've answered your question, Jesse.
Great, Jesse, I will take your silence as consent.
Oh, okay. Yes, I think I appreciate it. Was well put. Thank you, Geoffrey. I think I got exactly what I was trying to understand.
Great, thank you for your question, and thank you, Geoffrey, for that succinct and comprehensive answer. The next question is from Emily. Emily Karanji, if you can just unmute and ask your question directly to Geoffrey, that would be ideal.
Thank you, Iman, and thanks, Geoffrey, for the presentation. My question was, looking at the many policies and the many documentations that have been developed by the government, how do you see the FIT policy and the FIT renewable energy development can best be aligned with the country long-term strategy for maximum gains? And also, is there a better and broader measurement or framework that we can use in terms of tracking and supporting implementation of these policies?
Thank you, Emily. I think your question is also closely related to Jesse's question. What I can say is that the feed-in tariff policy maybe was very instrumental in highlighting Kenya as an investment destination globally in terms of energy investments, and it brought in a lot of interest. You have other countries that have also traveled the same path, but I think South Africa is a good example that also did away with the feed-in tariffs at some point. So looking at the scope that has been left now for feed-in tariff in Kenya, that it has only been limited to small-scale biomass, biogas, and small hydro projects. The entire future and of the feed-in tariff in the country actually is on the downward trend, and I think much of the favor will be going on now to the energy auctions, which I think also South Africa has gone through that path. For the fact that you are able to plan adequately, you are not only having projects that are coming on board without knowing where you are going to take the power, but you also to match the development and the country energy needs with the level of investments that are being made in the country. So yeah, moving forward, I do think that the government, I think, will shift, will have minimum focus on the feed-in tariff policy because they have viewed it as an instrument for stimulating interest. And still, we can say that there has been not a lot of investment in biomass and biogas. Small hydro, I think there is a lot of untapped potential, which the government would want it to be tapped in, bearing in mind that it is one of the cheapest form of energy in the country. And also from the view that the solar technology, the wind technology can be said to be mature technologies now. The cost of the technologies has been going lower, and therefore it is easy for them to operate on a competitive basis and not to enjoy protection, a lot of protection that they were being awarded under the feed-in tariff policy. So I think that is the future scenario that we might be looking at moving forward. that it might not be the main priority of the government, the feed-in tariff policy, and more priority might be going to the energy auctions. Over to you, Iman.
Thank you, Geoffrey. And I hope, Emily, that has been clarified for you. I hope your question has been adequately answered.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Geoffrey, we have one final question for you from Nyambura. Nyambura, I'm not sure if you can unmute, or should I just go ahead and ask you?
I can, but you might hear, kid music in the background, so please excuse me.
That's all right.
So my question is more on, I know we're talking about hydro, we're talking about biomass and biogas, but where does hydrogen fall in all this, right? And all the derivatives that come from that. In the renewable energy feed-in tariff, is there an allowance for that? Are we still in the study phase of the hydrogen potential for the region? I just want to understand more on the potential that lies in hydrogen production and even possibly exportation of this. And also how we even integrated this into our education policy or education system. Because I remember, what's his name? Geoffrey has stated that, there's access to jobs. I mean, how are we educating our population so that we're enabling them to be able to get these jobs? So it doesn't go to a particular class. The other one is, just how feasible is it that hydrogen is a possibility just going forward? That's all.
Thank you, Nyambura, for your question. Actually, I think the good thing about any policy is that it addresses itself to the status such that whenever an issue arises, then a policy is normally made to address that kind of issue, that kind of a challenge. So the initial feed-in tariff in 2008 was actually designed for solar and for wind, because that was the buzz that time. And there was a lot of research going around for solar and for wind, and also hydro is a traditional form of energy in the country. But with due recognition that also biomass could play a role in electricity generation, and also geothermal, Kenya being endowed with geothermal resources in abundance, it was agreed that this also needed to be also embedded in the policy, and therefore it was one of the reasons why the policy was revised in such a short span of time. I do believe with hydrogen, it might be the same scenario, that hydrogen is currently at research. There's a lot of research on hydrogen in terms of power storage, power generation, transport, and very many uses. But I still think, especially in the Kenyan context, it has not been viewed as a mature technology that can be, people can invest in to generate power, and therefore it has not been catered for in the current REFiT policy. It is my conviction that when that time comes, maybe it might be also added in a future revision if this would be necessitated. In a nutshell, I think that would be my comment on hydrogen. In terms of jobs, I think it is not. It needs like a multi-pronged approach to ensure that the communities where the investments are made benefit from this kind of investments in terms of the job access. One is to empower the community through increasing their access to education, to prepare them to be able to take advantage of this kind of job opportunities, and therefore you find that some of the companies or some of the investors are already putting back money in investment in education institutions. They are giving scholarships to needy students, the communities, to prepare them so that then when they're educated and they come back, they might be able to be absorbed in this kind of jobs. The other thing is awareness creation. And this is the role that the CSOs and NGOs have been playing to educate the people on their rights, to tell them that this kind of opportunities, when they arise, they are also entitled to them because one, they are Kenyans, but two, also they are happening at their backyard, and therefore they should get also due consideration to be able to take part in this kind of opportunities. So I can therefore say that, yeah, the communities where the investments take place sometimes are not well equipped to take advantage of this kind of opportunities, but with time and efforts that are being made, not necessarily in classrooms, but in public forums, and also concurrently educating the communities with formal education, I think with time they catch up and they're able to take up most of these opportunities. Over to you, man.
Thank you for that answer, Geoffrey. You have contextualized an issue that is still in research and is still, being globally looked into on the feasibility of hydrogen and the costing issues around it. I am seeing the chat box is exploding with a myriad of questions, but before I do that, I'd like to introduce our fellow panelist, Martha Wakoli, to join the conversation. Martha is a renowned electrical engineer who has tremendous expertise in the technical things around energy, the appliance efficiency, mini grids, and all the issues that the layman mind like mine could only hope to understand. She also has tremendous interest in ensuring the African youth is heard and has a voice, and their voice is impactful. She does a lot of work around free publications online to make sure that information is readily accessible, as well as running a blog that provides, again, a world of free knowledge for the common person to interact with these issues. Martha, if you could just unmute to let me know you're here and you're ready to go.
Hi, everyone. Just testing. Can we all hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can the chat let me know if the rest of the attendees can hear? Perfect. I can see that the audience can hear you. So great, Martha. Welcome to the conversation we've been having with Geoffrey leading us through the presentation on renewable energy feed-in tariff policy in Kenya, as well as the amazing questions that are being introduced by the attendees to understand these issues. I'd like to rope you into this conversation because I know you have a world of experience when it comes to the technical day-to-day interaction with this policy. When I read a policy, I sort of look at the legal document and put it aside, but you have actual experience with what this policy means for its day-to-day use. So with the Energy Act introducing in section 119 introducing the renewable energy auction policy, can you sort of come in and explain to us, just walk us through how this policy feeds into the FIT policy and what that means for the previous existing PPAs and the current ones and those that maybe were not signed already, and what the transition, if any, would look like?
All right, thank you. I hope I'm still audible. So by way of introduction, before I begin responding to the question, my name is Martha Wakoli. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for the invite. I've been working in the energy sector since 2015, and I think this context is important to kind of provide a foundation for some of the responses that I will be sharing. And so specifically in the context of this discussion around feed-in tariffs and now the auctions that are soon coming in, I worked as a project developer for two different independent power producers between 2019 and 2021. And it happened to be a very exciting time in this space because there were all these changes in regulation that were happening almost concurrently. So we had a new Energy Act being passed, there was a task force that was formed, there was a brief moratorium that was there on the signing of power purchase agreements between own independent power producers and the utility. And then there was the task force report thereafter that came along. And with it, there was also the release of a new proposed feed-in tariff and the renewable energy auction policy. And all this happened within a space of 3 to 4 years. And I just happened to be working in that space during that time. And so I think I may have a little bit to share in terms of my experience as a person who was, I suppose, getting impacted rather daily by the changes in regulation as the country was trying to decide what is the way forward for renewable energy. So with regard to the auctions policy and how that varies from the feed-in tariff policy, my understanding is that Geoffrey has provided a fairly good explanation of what the feed-in tariff policy is and how it typically works. So many countries that are at the beginning of regulating renewable energy coming into their grid or sort of being connected to their electricity network use feed-in tariff policies because they're structured, they're easy to understand, and they're usually fairly flexible in terms of negotiating between the off-taker and the seller of the electricity. But once a market advances beyond a certain point where there's enough internal capacity for renewable energy to be developed, they have removed most of the barriers for the development of these technologies, then you find that the price starts coming down considerably enough for us to open it into a competitive market process. And hence the suggestion, the newly made suggestion to transition some of the renewable energy sources such as solar and wind into an auction policy. Why is the government of Kenya considering doing this, and why is this the proposal that has been made? One, there has to be a balance between the intermittent sources that are being connected to the electricity grid and the sources that are considered dispatchable or those that can provide baseload. So sources such as hydro or sources that are thermal, say geothermal, can be regulated fairly easily, and therefore they can provide both baseload electricity, but also dispatch electricity in terms of when there's a high peak. However, when you have sources like solar and wind that are dependent on the availability of the resource, where the wind is blowing or when the sun is shining and at what intensity, then it means that those sources must be deployed as soon as they are generating. And the only mitigating factor for that is storage. However, in the initial phases of our feed-in tariff, most of the renewable energy projects that were being signed on and sort of getting power purchase agreements did not necessarily have a storage component. And therefore, it meant that every time the government signed on a new project, whether it is Lake Turkana Wind, whether you want to think about Garissa, the solar plant that's owned by REREC, or any other examples you might think of, then the government had to internally think about ways to manage the grid instability that may arise because of that intermittency. So I'm trying not to go too much into the weeds of the technicalities of managing how electricity is dispatched, sold, and used by people, but it's basically, in layman terms, trying to match the demand and supply. And so the auctions policy, beyond just trying to ensure that the end user, the consumer, gets the best price available for any solar generation that is put forward or any wind generation that is put forward, because it's a competitive process and so the cheapest bidder wins. The other thing it was trying to mitigate against is having an influx of projects happening all at the same time, and making it difficult for the grid to manage balance and demand and supply. So that's, I guess, the fundamental difference between how auctions are carried out and how the feed-in tariff, which was pre-structured with a preset tariff, was structured. So that's, I guess, my response up till that point, unless there's something that wasn't very clear that I can clarify on.
No, that was very clear. So the how they play into each other, especially with regards to cost, that was very clear. And I hope the audience is with me. I feel like that was clarified. Moving on with the questions in the chat box, I see that Martin has a couple of questions to direct at the panelists. Martin, if you can just unmute and direct your questions directly, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Iman, and thank you to the speakers that have done a fantastic job at clarifying some of these things. I just wanted to hear, initially I wanted this question to go to Geoffrey, but I guess now we can also hear from the other speaker. It seems to me a little bit counterintuitive, and I wanted to wonder why, to ask why we keep pursuing initiative that pushes more into the energy surplus realms, while costing us for the excess that we currently do not have the capacity to consume. What do the panelists think? Is this something that is judicious in any way? And secondly, Ndegwa mentions, about the jobs, talked about the 2,500 jobs that have been created by the Lake Turkana Wind Park. But actually they talk about 3,000 jobs that they have created so far, last time I checked on their website. But currently they only have 329 people employed. Now, when you subtract that from the 3,000, it tells you, it makes us wonder about the quality and the sustainability of the jobs that are provided by these initiatives. Are they something that is sustainable, these jobs? Are they sustainable? What's their quality? And do they give us a good value for money? And lastly, perhaps this is something for all of us to continue thinking about our own macroeconomic plans and outlook, whether they are quite motivated by the actual realities and needs on the ground, and if there is something fundamentally wrong about how we plan, not just our energy, but also the development that is to be serviced by the energy that we develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, for your question. And it was directed at both Geoffrey and Martha. And if we can start with you, Geoffrey, and then we go to Martha in our responses.
Okay, I will actually, because I had touched on the other one, I'll touch on the question on the jobs, and I'll leave the other one to Martha to touch on, because it has been very contentious when it comes to jobs, because a job should not be just a job by name, but it should be able to be a quality job and a job that is able to feed a family. But we have to be cognizant to the fact that there are different phases of renewable energy development or any infrastructure development. And in any of these development, there are different skills and different capacities that are needed to make sure that the investments is made. In this case, you have the planning phase, and the planning phase is to be done by technocrats, and much of it might be done at the boardroom, and maybe only the surveys are done on the field. At this particular level, you don't expect a lot of the local communities to be involved in this kind of jobs, unless you have a few of them that are technically capacitated to be able to do this. Then you have the development phase. The development phase needs both the brains and the brawns. The brains will be the ones to be making all the technical decisions, while the brawns are the ones to be implementing the decisions. And you find that this is where a lot of labor is absorbed from the ground, because most of the people who are on the ground that are not technically qualified to be participating in the project will be able to be absorbed to be able to do these menu jobs that are needed. We cannot say they are not important, because if a project is developed for a period of 1 year or maybe 2 years, these families have stable source of livelihood. They might be able to make some savings and invest in other areas, and therefore it might be a transition towards a better or a more sustainable livelihood for the family. So we cannot wish them away, but also you have to know that we cannot push them to do the technical jobs if they're not qualified, unless we are vouching for substandard quality infrastructure. Then the final phase is the operation and maintenance phase. The operation phase, where normally the activities that need labor are the operation and maintenance staff. You will find also these are technical activities. You will not be able to troubleshoot the challenges or the problems with the system if you are not trained to be able to do that. So unless the community, some community members are empowered to be able to do this, and that's why I said some go to school, some might go through on-site training, apprenticeship to be able to take some of these jobs. But it is, in a nutshell, it is very commendable having at the implementation phase or the development phase 3,000 people, and at the operation phase you have 10% of that amount of labor remaining to do the operation and maintenance and other activities in the field. I can say it's commendable actually for Lake Turkana to be able to achieve this. So we should be open and look at the jobs not only for having the people to be employed in their lifetime, but if they're able to make some income, they're able to make some money during these 1 or 2 years, they're able to buy some more cows, they're able to start a shop, they're able to buy to buy another piece of land, they're able to buy a motorbike and then start diversify their income opportunities. I think we should not also dismiss this kind of job opportunities for the local people. Over to you, Martha, for the other question.
Thanks, Geoffrey. I hope I'm still audible. So my video is refusing to cooperate today, so you have to bear with me and just get the audio alone at this point. Martin had asked about planning, and the question was in two parts. One, is there something fundamentally wrong with our planning system that we continue to focus so much on sort of energy supply, yet we have a surplus that is not being met by our demand? And the second one is there something that is missing that is not matching the needs and realities on the ground in terms of how we plan, not just for power in general, how we plan the macroeconomic outlook for this country. So I'll start with the first question, which is planning for the energy sector. And I suppose I should have said between 2015 and 2018, before I joined the private sector, I worked for the utility, I worked for Kenya Power. So I do actually have a little bit of insight on what goes on during that planning process. So I'd just like to state, there's a quote that I really enjoy, and it's the most expensive electricity is the one we don't have. So just to lay like a foundation for where I'm going with this discussion. And the reason I say that is because electricity, unlike, I guess, other commodities, let's say sugar, if we have sugar and the cup is full, then we say we have enough. If we pour a little more sugar into that cup and it overflows, we say we have a surplus. However, electricity is not only considered in terms of capacity terms. We also need to consider the reliability of that power and also the ease of access of that electricity or of that energy. So in many ways, it may seem like there is always an over-planning in terms of supply. And that has often been challenged because planning for supply is a little more sort of easier. It's more first principles because you plan how much investment you need. You plan which are the available resources that you have in country. You plan how much land you have to deploy some of these resources, and then you see, okay, then we can grow our capacity by X megawatts. However, the challenging thing is demand forecasting. And demand forecasting is where we need, all the skills of Martin and other researchers and economists of, great skill, because demand forecasting is very, very tied to human behavior. It's very tied to human behavior. Excuse me. And so that makes it not an exact science. Why do I say that? Because when we're focusing for demand, we're focusing against promises, let's say political promises that have said we shall have X kind of development in these areas. And so we have to pre-plan for the electricity to support, for the electricity infrastructure to support those kinds of developments. Whether those developments actually happen are not entirely in the domain of the energy sector. That's one. The second thing is there are other shocks that happens to economies that may not entirely be in Kenya alone. So for instance, the most obvious recent one is COVID-19. Yeah. So when you have a pandemic and there's a shock to an economy, the priorities of a government change because a government, for the most part, is supposed to work in the best interest of its citizens. And that's ensuring its citizens are fed, protected, safe, and are flourishing. So sometimes that means some allocations or some investments that had been planned, maybe for certain things, need to be moved around to accommodate other shocks in an economy, such as COVID-19 or now recently the war that's happening between Russia and Ukraine, the increasing food prices, inflation, etc. They're not unique to Kenya, but they impact us just as heavily as they would any other state. And then lastly, I think the thing that we have to be cognizant of is the plans that are made are usually really long-term, let's say 20-year plans, but they're often reviewed in the midterm. So they're reviewed every 3 to 5 years. And so we might have a static document called the Least Cost Power Development Plan, but it's actually reviewed. There are medium-term reviews that are carried out by this group of experts who then allow the plan to evolve to match our realities and needs. It is not a perfect science. They don't always get it exactly right, but I do know that they're hyper aware of the need to better reflect the supply and the demand growth. And so in the new Least Cost Power Development Plan, what you will actually notice is that for many of the projects, the commercial operation date was moved further away in recognition of the fact that our demand has not grown as quickly as they had initially envisioned. And so in a way, they're using commercial operation dates to kind of delay the deployment of certain projects that we are not ready to absorb yet. Another thing that you will see in that document is that there is now a heightened focus on storage. A little earlier, I believe someone was asking about hydrogen. I don't have that much technical expertise on hydrogen, but I do see that one of the use cases may be as a form of energy storage. And that would be super helpful if we're continuing to integrate intermittent sources into our energy grid as it stands today. And so there are some of these considerations that are being made on an evolving basis as the technology advances, as the cost of these technologies come down, as different shocks impact our market, but also as an awareness comes along that if we don't understand how to match our demand and supply in a way that is sustainable over the long term, then we shall never really benefit from these lowering costs of energy that we are all seeking for. So I don't know if that really responds to the question for, is there something wrong with how we plan? I don't know, I just wanted to provide context for, this is how we plan. It may not be an exact science, but it is not exactly based out of kind of like guesswork. There's a method to the madness, so to speak. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I feel like I have a lot from that 5-minute response. And I feel like if we don't take anything from this, let it be that this statement, the most expensive electricity is that which we do not have. That was a very powerful statement. Thank you for that, Martha. And for the continuation of this conversation, I see that Charles had some additional comments on the issues that have just been responded to by the panelists. Charles, if you are able to unmute yourself and weigh in, that would be great.
Yeah, I don't know if they can hear me.
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Charles.
Okay. My previous, it was really a comment, but I have a question now to Martha now that she's finished. There's two approaches to this thing. It's sort of this idea that build and they will come. And so you constantly have to just keep putting on capacity, even though you're reaching a surplus. But now, isn't the flip side to that question that the more expensive electricity is, the less people are actually now, are looking. So, sorry, let me flip it a bit. So in terms of the future access to the grid, if you keep building this expensive power, then less people are inclined to join. So you're seeing a lot of private sector, bigger players opting for their own private generated power capacity. And so isn't that like a sort of a very huge risk in this sort of continued policy of you just keep building infrastructure? Thank you.
Martha, go ahead if you can field that question.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. That's a difficult question because there's a chicken and egg problem there, but I'll try and approach it pragmatically. So you are right in observing that, of course, if the power costs as they are today are not lowering and increasing supply, and committing ourselves to these projects that mean we must keep paying for latent power does not necessarily bring down the cost of electricity, then it might mean we're trapping ourselves in this instance where then our demand will never really match the supply and we shall never be able to lower the costs. That may be the truth. But then the thing that I think is kind of trying to address that, perhaps it's not being felt yet, but the thing that is trying to address that, one is the shift in thinking and in approach towards auctions as opposed to towards feed-in tariffs. So one, the feed-in tariff, was like a set tariff, a set number that we had to commit to pay for X amount of years. Now with the auctions, it will still be a set number that we are committing to pay for a certain amount of time. But the idea is that that number should be considerably lower because technology costs have lowered. And also auctions are kind of, is it opened or the bidding is opened by the ministry and EPRA only when a need arises. So as opposed to people generally putting forth projects that we then have to consider for feed-in tariffs, now the new approach that is being proposed will be almost on an as-need basis. So that may not have like immediate impact in lowering the costs, but it certainly will assist in making electricity more affordable in the long term. The second thing is a lot of the power purchase agreements that had been previously signed, I believe in 2006 and between 2006 and 2010, many of them are on their last years of the PPA. And what that would typically mean is once that resource, like once we finish paying for, using that resource, then the resource remains to be used by the country, but we no longer have to bear kind of like the expensive purchasing cost for the electricity. We just continue to use and maintain the infrastructure because it already exists. So that's the second, I guess, way that they're trying to mitigate. I'm not entirely sure that those two ways alone will be sufficient to dissuade large consumers from going the green way as well. But if you want to think about it in terms of like optimism, green energy, whether it is self-generated or generated via the grid, is always a positive thing. Like having renewable energy projects spring up is a good thing in terms of job creation, but also in terms of building our capacity to handle those kinds of projects. So the question then becomes, what would the utility do, or what should the utility do to stay not profitable, but at least sustainably operational without going bankrupt in a time when many more large consumers have access to self-generation at an affordable cost? And that's a question that I would really like, anyone in the audience who has some insight to share with us, because the actual question here is, what should utility operators do? And that's not a Kenyan question only. We see it with ESCOM, we see it with ZESCO in Zambia, we see it with quite a number of countries. How should utilities adapt to the new normal, where the new normal is that solar energy is now affordable for private players to deploy it themselves?
Thank you. Thank you for that comprehensive answer, Martha. That was wonderful. And before I allow Charles to come back and ask his follow-up question, I'd like to just follow this thread that seems to be coming up around green hydrogen by inviting Fred. I see in the comments Fred has some insight to lend to the green hydrogen conversation. He's the program coordinator at Henry Ball Foundation. So I feel he can come in and weigh in on this green hydrogen conversation. Fred, can you unmute? Is that an option for you?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you can, go ahead.
And I must say I'm not an expert in this, so I'm just coming in. So I know you ambushed me just because I said I will share information. But in the position that I sit in, I think we have had quite a number of meetings and constructive engagement on the topic. And I'm also learning. So I'm not going into the technical part of it because, again, I'm not, Martha and Geoffrey could be an expert in that area. But in terms of engagement, yes, it's a very new area, especially for our region here in Eastern Africa, quite developed in the region of Western Africa and also South Africa, where projects are already happening. But as a matter of information, and already I think SIDT mentioned this will be the next phase whereby we have going to have discussions around this topic, is that Kenya is being cited as one of the countries that would be a good candidate for green hydrogen. Specifically because of our expansive, land in arid and semi-arid regions. And one of our office have done already a study in regards to two renewable projects that are targeted for this. That is the Electrocana wind power and Kipeto. Based on the challenges that pastoralists go through as far as issues of land tenure is concerned, and also communities engagement and human rights aspects around this project. But my view is this should be, again, a balanced discussion. As Martha Wakoli already said, hydrogen could be an opportunity of a storage of renewable energy, which has been a challenge over the years. But also it comes with some challenges as far as land issues are concerned, human rights issues. Currently, I think for us as ELG members is to engage also in areas of policy development. Where I sit currently, I don't think any regulations exist as at the present to govern the issues of green hydrogen. And that's again another avenue whereby people need also to engage. So for now, there's a report that was done by GIZ. If anyone doesn't have that, that's a baseline study that was done on feasibility of green hydrogen in Kenya. It's there, it's very comprehensive. If anyone wants to, I've already shared with a few who have reached out to me. You can have that and read and see how possible is it to have green hydrogen in Kenya. And the second report is which we have done as an office as far as pastoralism and large-scale renewable project in regards to green hydrogen. And that again could be informative as even we prepare for a further discussion on the topic. Thanks for now.
Thank you, Fred, for shedding some light on this issue. And for the audience, Fred has left his contact in the chat box. If you want to follow up on that feasibility study, please make sure you get your hands on it. I feel like it would be a useful resource for you. With that, I'd like to invite Charles to come back and ask his follow-up question for Martha and Geoffrey on the conversation around his original question to the panelists. Charles, can you unmute?
Yeah, thanks, Iman. The follow-up is just around financing, right? Because one of the challenges around financing is that if this push to have FDI as opposed to finding some sort of local mechanisms of financing means that we have power purchasing agreements that are either in dollars or foreign denominated. And so I've seen somebody has already responded in the chat box around that in terms of the challenges of local financing. But I was just wondering, I mean, if we created the same incentives that the foreign companies have, wouldn't the local market respond to that if you had the same incentives for the tax holidays and everything? Just a last question, and thanks again for indulging me.
No problem. Thank you for that question. And I'd like to invite both panelists to respond to that question. I feel it's a very complex issue that can be addressed from both the experience and perspectives that the panelists bring with them. Just unmute and go ahead.
Okay, can I go first? Because I think
sure,
it's something that. Thank you, Charles, for the follow-up question, and I think Jesse has tried to shed some light. But yeah, it is true that if we are able to fundraise locally for investment in renewable energy, it might be better for the country. But at the same time, looking at the source of all the technologies that we are investing in, much of the technologies are imported from outside the country, and of course, when importing them, we are importing them with US dollars. So it means that we are also the investments are also dependent on the international market, and also when you look nationally, there is always a challenge of crowding out the finance sources for this kind of investment, and also the associated risks that come with perceived risk. Let me call them perceived risks associated with renewable energy that some of the local players do not feel capacitated or able to absorb this kind of risks and put forward the level of investment needed to make some of this investment happen. So it might be something good to look at moving forward, starting with having maybe some of these technologies to be manufactured, the equipment to be manufactured locally, and also creating more avenues for reduced risks within the country, especially because people view like political risks. As long as it's a policy and it's open to political directions, then people perceive this as an avenue that you can invest in, and you end up losing on your investment. Yeah, I think that's what I would say about that. It can happen in the future, but I think it's a process. It's not something that we can say from now onward it's going to happen, but it's something that maybe can happen gradually if we purpose to do that.
Thank you, Geoffrey, for your answer. Martha, I'd like to invite you to also weigh in on that question.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Thanks, Charles, for that question. And I might provide actually a slightly more optimistic view here, just based off of what I've observed the last couple of years. So just to provide context, I think first, I think mostly PPAs were denominated in dollars for two reasons. One, most of the independent power producers, as you've rightly pointed out, were kind of like foreign firms, and therefore they were accessing their credit from their countries of origin. So assuming it's an Italian firm that's building, then they can access credit from the Italian market, or if it's a listed company, they can access it from the Italian stock exchange. And for them, that makes it easier to get euro at a favorable rate and then come and trade it here in dollars for a PPA. However, having said that, in the last couple of years, there have been a couple of Kenyan banks that I have seen either collaborate on facilities with other development agencies, so such as the SunRef facility. I think it was being run through Cooperative Bank, if I recall correctly. It used to be the French Development Agency had a facility that was being deployed through Coop Bank to support, small renewable energy projects. And then similarly, Equity Bank, Equity, the very proud Kenyan bank, I think has an arm now or a pillar that's looking into renewable energy and greening of spaces, and has a kind of like facility for supporting these kinds of projects, whether it's supporting the private sector to put up their own renewable facilities for own consumption, or supporting renewable energy projects in general to move forward. And then lastly, and this is the more interesting aspect of like how local investment could be tapped to support these energy projects and hopefully, denominate PPAs in Kenya shillings, is pension funds. If we think about large scale pension funds, and the return now from the stock exchange or from bonds and treasuries might be a certain amount in terms of percentage. But if you think about the return on renewable energy, if you're thinking about it as a business, it might actually be competitive, with some of the areas that pension funds are currently investing in. And so there's an example I have, I think they're called CPF. I know where they're located in town, but I'm not quite sure what CPF stands for. They're somewhere on Harambee Avenue, I believe. But they're a pension fund that I believe has an in-house team that scopes out renewable energy projects that their fund can invest in. And it's a Kenyan pension fund run by sort of a Kenyan team. And the team that was scoping out renewable projects, I was very proud to see, was also Kenyan. And so in many ways, the progress has already begun. And so it's just a matter of how quickly, it's a matter of scale. One, what size of projects are feasible for the kind of financing we have internally? And then secondly, and this is something you already mentioned, Charles, yourself, is what kinds of incentives can we then give for local investment or local finance facilities to support the development of renewable energy projects? Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad both the panelists' answers sort of give us the inevitability of this, that we'll end up there, and it's just a matter of when and how fast we get there, and that gives us a lot of hope. Before I allow Victor's question to lead us into the political aspect of things, we can finish with the economic aspect, and I'd like to invite Jesse to just add on to this conversation with his response from the chat box. Jesse, if you can unmute. Jesse, are you there?
I'm here. Sorry, I didn't get your question.
Oh, I just wanted you to sort of wrap up this conversation around financing and economics. I can see you have some additional comments in the chat box. So if you'd just like to have the opportunity to add them before we move to Victor's question.
Oh, okay. Thank you. I was saying we need to look at what are these challenges. We need to map them so that we can be able to when we are now getting to the discussion level, we're able to tell this is the challenges we have. And one of the main factors, as has been previously been said, it's local when it comes to local financing, is that you find most institutions in Kenya might not be willing to take over such large infrastructure that takes time. And this is financing through the project finance, which again it's through earning the revenues that they will be paying some of these loans. So sometimes they shelve from the institutions in Kenya, they shelve from doing such. But we need to also ask ourselves what happens that institutions outside Kenya they will come and do what the institutions in Kenya are not daring to do. So it's more of the challenges with also how sure are they that they will be able to get back their finances along the way. So for me, I would say it's a whole topic that we need to deliberate also and try to map where the challenges are and what can be the solutions. But at least I gave an example of Cooperative Bank. It is one of the banks that was used in, it partnered with an international institution, I can't remember which, to finance the Makoborero solar power plant in Nyeri, which is 1.85 megawatt.
Thank you for that. We'll definitely look into that example that you've given. To now direct the conversation to the question in the Q&A, Victor Otieno, I see you have a question in the Q&A option in the chat. Would you like to have the opportunity to speak? I'm not sure if you have the opportunity to unmute.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was just reacting to the comments from Martha about maybe the possible reasons of the demand and supply mismatch. And I was agreeing that among the other reasons that are there, it might be also because of the political promises. And I was just asking, is there something that we can do about the political promises in a manner that they can be engaged on the promises that they are making, and whether that can better inform the projects that they are putting forward and thereby inform the demand forecasting. Because I think it's one of the biggest influencers when it comes to the mismatches of demand and supply. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. Definitely election times and all of these political promises made by the political class usually cause a lot of opportunity to discuss. I'd like to now invite Martha if she wants to respond to this comment, if you have an additional comment, because this is the day-to-day and the realities for the communities.
Yeah, thanks, Victor, for the additional sort of note in terms of political promises. So there are two things that had been raised that I think should be flagged here in the context of energy. One is land and land use and how we value land in Kenya. And most renewable energy projects will require land. And so that's the first and usually most engaged form of project development that you will have with the politicians, because you need buy-in from citizens, and to get buy-in, you need to go through their leaders. So that's one. However, there is no quantitative way, unfortunately, at least none that I have found yet, because I work mostly with numbers, spreadsheets, analytics, graphs, and diagrams. There is no quantitative way to measure the variable that is politics and its impact on demand forecasting, and therefore demand planning and energy planning in general. Why? Because politics varies on a day-to-day. Many of us on the call are Kenyans, and so we're quite aware of how volatile politics can get. And therefore, what that means is, like, on a day-to-day basis, it is a risk that an investor must be willing to take to kind of commit to a 20-year project or a 20-year investment in the face of the potential of changing political sceneries for at least 5 years, on a 5-year cycle during that 20-year period. And so one of the ways that used to be mitigated actually in projects is by buying something called political risk insurance. And some of you may have heard of it. In other countries, it is given as a sovereign guarantee. In Kenya, before, we used to provide a letter of support. And it's basically assigning the risk to the government to manage any outcomes that are related to politics, so that investors can feel comfortable enough, to put their investment in the country. Whether the investor is local or international, doesn't matter. People need to feel comfortable, whether they're banks or whatever, to put their money in a project, in a place, and know that their money will be safe. So I'm not quite sure that there's a scientific proven way, that we can really minimize the impact of politics on projects. But the reality is, at the moment, the letter of support kind of used to mitigate that. I understand that there was a moratorium on issuing letters of support during when the task force was working. And the task force was working, I believe, in 2021 up till December 2021. And then they released their report. I don't have the latest information on whether that moratorium was lifted or not, but I do know that the directorate was finally assented into law, the Directorate for Public-Private Partnerships. And whether or not the government will commit moving forward to issuing letters of support is still kind of up for debate. I'm not quite sure what the response to that is. So I'm also open to hearing feedback from the rest of the panelists and the attendees on how really can we mitigate political risk. But the truth is, politics affects not just the energy sector, all sectors, and different sectors react to managing that risk in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Martha, for posing the question to the audience. What can we do as citizens with regards to this political question? I'd like to invite Pasi Amayo, if she can lend her voice to this question that Martha has just posed to the audience.
Yes,
Great,
sure. I hope you can hear me. Last time there was a hitch. This is a very interesting question that Victor asks, and he said as part two, and thank you, Martha, for the responses. We've learned something. I've particularly picked up the political risk insurance that I think is something we should go back to doing, especially as a way of holding governments accountable, but also giving them the responsibility to take, to take responsibility for the decisions that they make on behalf of citizens. But I think that there is a question that Victor asked, what can we do about political promises? And I think this is a very critical question and a critical time for us to meditate upon this question, because we have elections that are just coming up in a month or so. And it's very interesting for me to analyze the different manifestos that are beginning to come out. And a lot of them have touched on the energy sector as one of the priorities. And for me, I see this as an invitation by political parties and all these coalitions that have come together to vie for various seats to say, this is what we are thinking as potential future political leaders when it comes to the energy sector. They've given us an open invitation to interact with them and to engage them. And so the question, the most probable answer for me now is to take that invitation and begin to engage them. And one of the proposals that we have put together as part of the programming for this program in the next phase is to actually take the manifestos from the different political parties and actually map out what they each say about energy, climate, environment, some of the issues that are affecting our space, as experts and individuals interested in the sector, and begin to analyze what are they saying, what is realistic, what isn't. And I think there's also a follow-up mechanism to that, because eventually their political spaces will be taken and leaders will be elected and will be in that space. How can we influence a more active citizen participation to follow up and to be more interested and to ask those difficult questions that sometimes we fail to ask? And I think the citizenry remains unable to ask because they remain uninformed. So I think this is a channel for the experts here and the civil society, and even those of us who have formulated this impact network, the Energy Reference Group, to take more action and to lead people to begin being active citizens and asking and answering and following up and holding our leaders to account. So that would be my answer. So let's take up the open invitation by political parties to actually scrutinize the promises that they're making to us to leverage us to vote for them in the next election. Thanks, Iman.
Thank you, Pasi. That's a wonderful challenge. Scrutinize manifestos, read manifestos, draw up what each manifesto is including and whether it works for you, and what needs to be done so that when you vote consciously and with intention. That is a perfect way to transition into the next section of this conversation. I'd like to invite Society for International Development Communications to sort of guide us through the next section. Crispus and Koba, I'm not sure if you are able to unmute to guide us through the next section.
Iman, if I might just do
go
one
ahead.
question before we go to Crispus.
Sure, go ahead.
Looking, and I think this is going to be in terms of the tribunal that has been reconvened just recently, and looking at the changes that the policy, the feed-in policy has brought in, do we expect to see more cases going to the tribunal in terms of because of the changes that are going to be implemented using the feed-in tariff policy 2021, whereby going to the auction way, if some of the what can I say? If some of the signing processes were not done, do we expect to see more cases being presented to the tribunal that is has just been reconvened, or what do we expect to see from now?
Thank you, Emily. That's a very interesting addition to the conversation, and I feel like I can see the conversation just blowing up in the chat box, and there's very interesting additions to the conversation. So just everybody, please make sure you're following the chat box in case I'm not able to vocalize some of the questions that are being typed out. Crispus, now would be a great time to hand over to you if you are able to just unmute. I don't think he's able to unmute. That's completely okay. I'd like to hand over to. Hello, there you are. Go ahead.
I hope you can hear me. I'm trying to sort some technical issues on my end.
Yes, today is a day of technical hiccups, it would seem,
yeah.
But no problem at all. Just go right ahead.
If you can give me just 2 minutes so I can sort that out, because I'm struggling with the internet.
Yeah, no problem. In the meantime, I can ask some of the comments in the chat box to be vocalized. Martin, I see you are involved in the robust chat in the chat box. Do you want to say some additional words before we move on?
Yeah, I always have something to say, man. But yeah, I just wanted to point out to something that Charles asked, and for which a lot of other commentators have weighed in, that I think first of all the issue of PPAs being foreign denominated is not a guarantee that they should be injurious to local investments. And I think perhaps this has to do with the structure of these investments, the structure of the PPAs themselves, and if they are more supply driven than demand driven. And I think most of the problems we've had so far, closely related to what Martha said earlier, have had to do with us moving the supply. There is supply of credit from outside of country, and these credits can be applied to Kenya. And when Kenya sees that, there is a lot of gravitation towards that, and then bringing it in and using it to do whatever they want to do. I don't know whether this has to do with the cuts that a lot of people get and the kickbacks that we've heard from before, and that is what perhaps motivates a lot of that. But that's a question for another day. The other issue about political accountability, political economy issues are not issues we can, of course there are some issues we can measure quantitatively with regards to whether, enclosure, encroachment, inclusion, exclusion, and so on and so forth. there are frameworks for measuring these political economy issues and the processes. And we shouldn't always be looking forward to depoliticize issues, because, I mean, when you look at the Big Four, for instance, the Big Four as a political manifesto or a political venture has had quite some impact in the energy developments, especially not just in the pronouncements, but also in the investments that have been made. But more so as civil societies, I think not just civil society, but also even the public sector, we need to have more actualization of this robust framework that Kenya has put in place for public participation, accountability mechanism, and all these things that lead to translating the political promises into tangible development initiatives, or whatever the initiatives to the people. We have a role there, but we need to take it. We just need to take it. It's there. Thank you.
Wonderful, Martin. Thank you for those insights. It's always nice to hear from you. I'd like to now hand over to Pasi Amayo to just guide us to the next section. I think Crispus is still experiencing some technical issues, so Pasi will step in. Pasi, are you there? Can you unmute?
Yes, I am here.
There you are.
Thank you. Thanks, Iman. I think this has been a very rich conversation, and we've unfortunately come to the end of our 2 hours for the Public Energy Forum today. But I think a lot of things have come out of the conversation, things that we didn't understand that we have a deeper understanding for right now, and also a lot of things that are emerging that we need to do more research on and that we need to do more work on. We've had conversations about job creation and the impact and risk that come with that when it comes to talking about the renewable energy sector. We've seen conversations coming up about green hydrogen. What is the opportunity? What is the risk? What does this mean for us as Kenyans, and even for the East African context that our project works under? So I think this conversation has begun here, but it will definitely be continuing into the next series that we will be bringing together with the work we will be doing with the Energy Reference Group. We wanted to share with you the research that was done by Geoffrey Ndegwa and Emmanuel, who was not able to join us, but the link is proving to be very challenging to share at the moment. So we have decided that we will be sharing a link to the paper on our social media pages and directly with all of you on your emails after this, so that you can get to interact with the research that has been done in the unpacking of the REFiT policy in Kenya by Geoffrey, and just a broader version of the presentation that he gave. Along with that, I want to thank you on behalf of the SID team and the Henrichville team for coming for this Public Energy Forum. We will be having more of this because I think we're living in a critical time, and a lot of the technical jargon and information and data that exists on what is happening in the sector is not easy to digest. And so we are here with incredible people from the Energy Reference Group. Some of them have spoken to you today. I want to particularly say a special thank you to Martha Wakoli, who was our discussant for this particular session, for coming in, weighing in, offering your insight, your knowledge, experience, and expertise. We're very grateful to you. And we want to also say that as we are going into the election season, as I had already mentioned, there is an opportunity to scrutinize what the manifestos are saying about energy, to unpack those, and even to invite and to take the invitation that the political parties have given us to look into what they're thinking when it comes to energy, climate, and environment. And I have seen that Victor is interested in moving this conversation forward. If you are there, we will be looking out to you as well to continue sharing these conversations and to see where our future lies beyond the elections when it comes to the energy sector. With that, I want to thank you, Iman, for being a very incredible, lively, exciting moderator for the conversation today. And I want to wish you all the best. I can see now that the link for the publication has been shared. So please check out the link that Emily has shared. We will be posting the paper on the REFiT policy there. Have a good evening, and thank you so much for your attention. Until the next forum, mukue salama. Kwaheri.
Thank you, Pasi, and thank you everyone for joining us. Great, I can see everyone is just saying bye in the chat. Thank you all for joining us. Goodbye to all of you. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you to the panelists for being so educated and well-informed. And thank you for the engaging conversation. Have a great rest of your day and goodbye.